Hot nets? Yeah. 100%, yeah. Maybe I'll get my mom. She went to Maryland for undergrad. She can come out and, night on the town. I only really have like trauma from that place because I was getting my master's there during COVID, and I was just like going to night school, getting in at 7 p.m., leaving at 10 p.m. Like it was brutal. But we'll manifest happier times.
If you're just entering the room, could you make sure you've clicked on the QR code outside the room? Oh my gosh.
Hey, Jane.
Hey, you are.
We're like, oh my God, it's Jane. We love her.
That's really funny. It's great to see you guys.
We're only here for
Yay.
signals.
So welcome everyone online and in the room. We're gonna probably take another 4 to 5 minutes to get started as people come in from the snack break. The snack break has a huge draw, so we don't want to compete with coffee and cookies. And if you're just entering, if you could click on the QR code, if you haven't clicked on the QR code outside the room, if you could do that to make sure you're registered for the meeting. And anything and everything you say in this room is, you can see the notes being taken. So. And for those of you that know Curtis Heimel really well, Curtis is in Vietnam, so he's not here today. And Adesorn, who's our tri-chair, is in Bangkok, so it's really early for him. So I'm going to run us through this GAIA. Okay, before we get started, part of the process with introducing not only our speakers, but being here at IETF is that to let you know that the session is being recorded. As you can see, it's also being transcribed, which is super helpful to all of us later when we take notes. Please make sure to sign into the session via data tracker or the QR code in the session. Use Meet Echo, which you're probably doing anyway, to join the queue, show hands. So if you haven't joined on your devices, please do so. That way you can join the queue or wave at me. If you're in the room, please keep your audio and video off with respect to Meet Echo, because then we have this wild echo in the room. That was a thing I learned the hard way. For remote participants, make sure your audio and vid are off unless you are chairing or presenting. Use a headset, blah, blah, if you're remote. For all of you that are remote, I think that's mostly Steve and Eric. Feel free to use headsets, or your audio came in well before when we did a little sound check. Please state your name each time you begin speaking if you're in the queue, if you choose to be in the queue later. Our participants and our speakers will speak for about 22 to 25 minutes, and then we'll have Q&A for about 8 to 10 minutes after. So the note well is something important for everybody to note well. And I say this seriously. This is something that all research group chairs and working group chairs are asked to make sure participants understand. By participating in the IETF, you agree to follow IETF processes and policies. This note well is a reminder of some of those policies. People laugh at me for reading this, but I'm going to read it. For a linked version of this text, you can visit the following link or use the QR code below. IETF participants are expected to behave in a professional manner and extend respect and courtesy to their colleagues at all times. See this RFC if you need more information about guidelines for conduct and IETF anti-harassment policy. If you have any concerns about behavior, please contact the Ombuds team, who have a duty of confidentiality and extensive powers to act as set out in RFC 776. If you're aware that any IETF contribution, as defined in RFC 5-7-8, is covered by patents or patent applications, this is not really applicable to GAIA, but I'm going to read it anyway, that are earned or controlled by you, your employer, or sponsor, you must disclose that fact or not participate in the discussion. Everything here I think we're going to talk about is open source. For detailed process information, consult RFC 2026 Internet Standards Process and RFC 2418 IETF Working Group Guidelines and Procedures and updates to those. The IETF routinely makes public written audio, video, and photographic records of IETF activities, including your personal information, as set out in the IETF privacy statement. For advice, please talk to working group chairs or area directors. There is another slide that I haven't put in here that has more information. So if you go to the IETF data tracker or IETF website and click Note Well, you'll see that other slide. It has more links. And here's some of the resources. And we're going to get to the good stuff now. We have three fabulous speakers here with us today. First up will be Wesley Wu from Virginia Tech. On anyone, anywhere, but not everyone, everywhere. Starlink doesn't close the digital divide. Second person up will be Steve Song from the Internet Society. He's going to speak about the Open Fiber Data Standard and shedding light on fiber networks. And last but not least is Eric Greenlee from Georgia Tech. He's going to speak about the Macaque, a co-designed sensor buoy to support Manuman health and tribal sovereignty. So give me a second to pull up the slides. Wesley, you're going to be up first. And we are going to make sure, where is that tricky? Okay, here you go. And I will give you a heads up around in 20 minutes. Okay, yeah. Absolutely. So please meet Wesley. Wesley works with a professor whose name is Shadi, who helped design a really interesting, I think it was 2G at the time, 3G now, maybe 4G software for mobile networks, yeah? Open software. And he and Curtis, who's a co-chair, helped design that at one point in time, that technology.
Yeah.
Okay, over to you.
Sure. Thanks, Jane. Hey, everyone. As Jane just said, I'm Wesley. I'm a PhD student at Virginia Tech, and today I'll be talking through some work that we did evaluating whether Starlink can close the digital divide. This is work that'll appear at Hotnets in a couple weeks, and it's work that's been done with a couple collaborators, including Juan from Sierra Leone, who's in the audience today, Sylvia Ranasamy and Scott Schenker from the NetSys group at UC Berkeley, and my advisor, Shadi, who Jane just mentioned. So Starlink's kind of positioned itself as the leading low Earth orbit-based internet service provider, and as such has marketed itself as kind of the scalable solution to the digital divide. On the left is a series of tweets and retweets, reposts by various members of the leadership teams of SpaceX and Starlink. I think it really highlights this vibe that they're trying to give off. To be fair, a lot of this marketing has been built up on really impressive innovation by the Starlink team. They've been able to connect users to the internet from almost anywhere in the world, as long as they have a user terminal and an overhead view of the Starlink mega constellation. However, as many of us in the room know, closing the digital divide is a lot more than just providing internet connectivity in hard to reach or remote places. In fact, actually, a lot of stakeholders from civil society instead propose that the goal should be to provide universal and meaningful connectivity in order to close the digital divide. Universal connectivity referring to connectivity for all people in all places, much like universal education is about giving education to all people in all places. And meaningful connectivity referring to connectivity that is reliable and useful for end users, and most importantly, is also affordable for these end users.
Can you get a little closer to the microphone?
Sure. Maybe it was high for these. Hello, how's this?
Is that better for the remote participants? Thank you, Lorenzo.
Okay. Oops. And go back to the slide.
Get closer, it won't bite you.
How's this?
Okay. Can you hear better, Lorenzo?
Closer
Yes.
to the mic, just kidding.
Okay. Thank you, Jonathan and Lorenzo and all. Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah, it's strange. Eating the mic is a real thing, right? Okay.
Yeah, so we have this definition of universal and meaningful connectivity that's been offered to us by many stakeholders from across civil society. And so in this work, what we're trying to do is bring this, are these claims by Starlink that it can, effectively bridge the digital divide with this definition. So what I propose that we do is that we evaluate whether Starlink has enough capacity to cover everyone everywhere and actually provide universal connectivity. I also propose that we should evaluate Starlink and whether it can provide meaningful connectivity, specifically along the axis of affordability. For this particular work, we focus on the United States just because of data availability and the clear guidelines that the United States sets out for defining reliable internet access. We kind of leave a direction of open work as investigating other regions of the world or countries, given that they have different goals for connectivity. So we'll begin the discussion with a talk through of how we evaluated capacity of Starlink. And we'll begin this with a quick overview of the Starlink system. So Starlink is composed of user terminals on the ground, satellites in the air, and gateway terminals on the ground. User terminals are what connect users to the network. Gateway terminals are what connect the network to the internet, and satellites are used to connect user terminals to gateway terminals. The big innovation of Starlink is that they brought satellites down from geostationary orbit to low Earth orbit. At this height, the end-to-end performance of the network is greatly improved. But at this height, these satellites are also moving around in orbit. And so this satellite constellation has to be deployed as a mega constellation. So hundreds to thousands of satellites are above the Earth or cover the Earth's surface. And this ensures that each user terminal has a satellite above it at any given point in time. Another piece of this design that's important is that these satellites have spot beams that they place on the Earth's surface in order to connect user terminals to the rest of the network. This is in contrast to these geostationary orbits, geostationary satellites that existed before that remain in the same relative position fixed to the location on the Earth's surface and thus don't need to repeatedly place these spotlights on the Earth. So given this model of Starlink, we identified two bottlenecks that we want to evaluate. The first is the wireless channel capacity of these beams that are being placed on the Earth's surface. And the second is the number of steerable beams that these satellites have and can place on the surface. So we'll start by discussing bottleneck one. And we start by looking at some reports that Starlink made to the Federal Communications Commission that outline the technical details of the system. So Starlink reports that they dedicate just under 4,000 megahertz of spectrum to serve user terminals on the ground. Previous work has kind of shown that they're achieving a spectral efficiency of about 4.5 bits per second per hertz, which translates to about 17.3 gigabits per second of capacity for each of these spot beams that a satellite can place on the Earth. So the next question is, how many users are being served given this fixed supply? To answer this question, we're going to take a step back and kind of look at what the state of connectivity is in the United States. We specifically pulled data from the National Broadband Map, which is maintained by the Federal Communications Commission. This map is built from reports from individual internet service providers who report which locations they can cover. And as such, we end up with this map that tells us all the and underserved locations in the United States. So given all these locations, we map them or group them into these Starlink service areas, which have been explored in previous work. And we find that the maximum demand in a single service area for the Starlink network is around 600 gigabits per second. So clearly this is a big mismatch. There's 17.3 gigabits per second of supply from the wireless channel, and there's 600 gigabits per second of demand in the busiest, the densest region of unserved locations. And so there's two approaches that Starlink can take to kind of resolve this mismatch. The first approach they could take is to adopt a pretty high oversubscription rate in their network. 600 gigabits per second and 17.3 gigabits per second. This looks like about 35 to 1 oversubscription. And for those who aren't familiar, oversubscription is a pretty widely adopted policy that's used by wireless internet service providers, in which the capacity they offer to customers is lower than the actual capacity that they build out with their network. A second kind of approach that Starlink could take is they could simply choose not to serve all of these unserved locations. And so this actually ends up being somewhat appealing given the distribution of unserved locations across the United States. So this graph shows the distribution of cell density across all these unserved locations. What we're seeing is that 99% of these service cells have fewer than 1,500 locations, and 90% of these service cells have fewer than 552 locations. And so what essentially this is telling us is that there's very few locations that are kind of forcing Starlink to oversubscribe at high rates. So their kind of second course of action is to adopt a lower oversubscription rate, but still serve 99.9% of unserved locations within the United States. So again, to quickly summarize, after looking at this first bottleneck of wireless channel capacity, we find that Starlink is a little bit limited by the spectrum availability, but can overcome it by allowing high rates of oversubscription, or by just choosing to serve at most 99.9% of unserved locations at lower levels of oversubscription. So next we'll look at whether the number of beams on the satellite are a bottleneck in the system and affect capacity. And we actually turn around this question. We instead ask how many satellites will be required in order to meet the demand for beams that is associated with the current number of unserved locations. So first we assume, in order to calculate this number of satellites, we first assume that the densest cell is requiring all available spectrum to serve. So it kind of requires multiple beams from the satellite to serve the single cell. And then we make kind of a best case scenario simplifying assumption that the surrounding cells from this densest cell can also be served with a single beam. What essentially this is doing is just giving us a lower bound or a lower estimate on the number of satellites that will be required to meet a particular demand footprint.
Do you think you could take the mic out and put it closer to you?
Okay.
Yeah. It's just the fellow next door is loud.
Okay.
Perfect.
This is better.
Is that better, John? Yeah, okay. Voila. Okay.
Sounds good. Okay, so given this approach to estimating the number of satellites that'd be required to serve the distribution of unserved locations in the United States, we come up with a number that looks like 80,000 satellites. The story isn't quite over here. Before we arrive at a final number, we take into account this approach called beam spreading. Beam spreading is basically serving multiple service areas with a single beam, and this is allowed by kind of the trigonometric properties of satellites in orbits and beams being broadcast down into Earth. So here you can kind of see that if a particular service area is directly underneath the satellite, the projection of the beam is a smaller area on the Earth's surface, whereas if the service areas are kind of further away from the 90-degree angle, the projection of the beam is larger. So this is actually something that Starlink has been found to take advantage of. So, given that beam spreading is a capability that Starlink can use, we generate kind of a sensitivity analysis, or we look at the different number of satellites that would be required to fulfill our demand given different degrees of beam spread. We see that this number ranges from 8,000 satellites to 5,000 satellites. To figure out what a reasonable beam spread degree could look like, we look at the fraction of these US service cells that can be served by a beam. So a key factor in this is that when we're serving when we're using beam spread to serve more service areas with the same beam, each cell gets a smaller fraction of the beam's bandwidth. And so fewer kind of locations per cell are supported. So what we see from this analysis is that most of the US cells would support a beam spread degree of at most 2, given an oversubscription limit of 20 to 1. And so what we end up with is an estimate of around 40,000 satellites required to serve all these unserved locations in the United States. Yeah. And so from these first two findings, looking at these two bottlenecks, we kind of realized that a very realistic approach that Starlink is going to take is just to choose not to serve some locations in the United States. And we thought the best way to illustrate this is to look at how many satellites it would take to kind of cover the last or the next or marginal locations of unserved internet demand. So in the blue, we can see a particular configuration or model of assuming a beam spread of 2 and a subscription rate of 20 to 1. We see that it takes approximately 39,000 satellites to serve the first 4.6 million locations, and the next 37,000 locations require 2,500 satellites. And then after that, the next 7,000 locations or 7,500 locations require an additional 2,000 satellites. And so we kind of take away from this section of the analysis is that this long tail of cell density is really introducing significant diminishing returns that seem to clearly disincentivize Starlink from serving the long tail of these users. We also mentioned meaningful connectivity. And so in this section, we'll quickly discuss the affordability of Starlink and whether it can provide meaningful connectivity. And so it's a little difficult to quantify affordability of internet service because it's hard to generalize the utility that different households might get from using the internet. But one particular metric that's been proposed by the Alliance for Affordable Internet, and that's been adopted by the United Nations and has been used by the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission in the United States, as a benchmark, is this idea that internet service should not cost more than 2% of your monthly income. And so for given this kind of 2% proportion and using the median income data per county from the United States Census, we see that 3.5 million locations are in counties where the cost of Starlink's base plan, which is $120 a month, is unaffordable. It's over this 2% kind of cutoff. Even with existing subsidies from the government, the Lifeline subsidy, which offers just under $10 a month of subsidy towards internet service, 3 million locations are left without affordable Starlink access. In contrast, we look at some of Xfinity and Spectrum's nationwide offerings, and we see that in the case of Xfinity, all of these unserved locations are in areas where Xfinity's $40 a month plan is affordable. Whereas for Spectrum, only 299 locations, or 0.01% of all locations, are in areas where this $50 a month plan would be unaffordable. So basically what we see from our evaluation of whether Starlink can provide meaningful connectivity is based on median income. About 3.5 million out of 4.7 million locations can't afford Starlink's residential service plan. While other comparable plans from Xfinity and Spectrum are affordable at 99.99% of these locations. So to quickly summarize the findings of this work, first we saw that high rates of oversubscription are required given the limitations of the current spectrum allocations to Starlink. A future direction I'd like to kind of push in, given this finding, is looking for ways to estimate current rates of oversubscription in Starlink's network. Some interesting work from Ookla recently has pointed out that a lot of users are not receiving their 100 megabits per second downlink service that they're subscribing to. It's also, I think, a really important question to ask: at what rates are oversubscription from users, or at what oversubscription rates are users going to start being significantly impacted? Yeah, given that there's so much hype around Starlink, given degraded service. Our second finding was that even with beam spreading and oversubscription, a Starlink would still require 40,000 satellites just to serve all the unserved locations in the United States, not including any of their current customers. And the question that I have there is whether Starlink can really afford to host a constellation of 40,000 satellites, given that each satellite costs anywhere from $1.5 to $2 million to put up and has a lifetime of 3 to 5 years. Our third finding was that there's really high diminishing returns to serving the long tail of users, and this seems to disincentivize Starlink from serving certain populations, specifically populations in dense or populations of dense demands, but that are located in remote areas. And so I think a very natural question, I'm sure a question that many people are thinking about, is what access technologies are probably best for serving such remote, dense areas at low cost. And our final finding was that around 3.5 million locations are unable to support or unable to afford Starlink service, given this 2% definition of affordability. And I think the natural question that can also be applied broader to the Starlink context is how much would it cost to meaningfully subsidize internet service nationwide? I think there's a whole nother research direction here of looking at all the current offerings across the United States and whether those are affordable to each county. So I'd like to conclude with a pointer to and a really interesting analogy made by Steve Song. Steve's a longtime advocate for affordable internet connectivity, and also coincidentally coming next in this presentation. I didn't know that when I made these slides. So Steve kind of positioned the digital divide as this empty mason jar, and proposes that bridging the digital divide is the equivalent to filling this jar with rocks. Large national network operators can be thought of as large rocks, which are really effective at filling space in this jar. But given a lot of large rocks, there's still a lot of space left over that can't be filled with other large rocks. What we really tried to set out to do in this work was outline the shape and size of the Starlink rock. And from our findings, we believe that even though it's really easy for Starlink to serve anyone, anywhere through their technological innovation, it's actually quite difficult for them to serve everyone, everywhere, especially when we consider definitions of meaningful connectivity. What's clear to me is that closing the digital divide really requires innovation of multiple forms, including novel technologies, new models of spectrum access, infrastructure sharing, and community or municipal-based approaches to connectivity. Thank you.
Okay, in the queue we have, I think it's Jörg.
Yeah. Hi. Thanks much. Very, very cool work. I have one question for clarification and a comment. So it seems that in your US analysis of underserved regions, and especially when you talk about dense areas, you would have assumed that Starlink would be the only internet service provider, right? Or did you assume Starlink to complement what's already there? Because normally you would have sufficient other economic incentives for providers to offer internet connectivity in metropolitan regions. So you wouldn't use Starlink there because there wouldn't be a need. So did you take this into account in your computation?
Yep, that's right. We looked at locations that weren't served by other internet service providers.
And they were still, wow, that's still impressive. Yeah. Okay, the comment I had, I'm surprised that the US even has such a poor affordability ratio. When we had the LeoNet workshop at SIGCOMM this year, we were on a panel and we're discussing sustainability and affordability as well. I don't recall the numbers that I looked up back then, but it turns out that if you put the cost in the cost in a particular country in relation to the normalized income there, you end up with humongously large numbers in many countries of Africa, for example. So I suspect your second number would be way worse the moment you leave the United States. So I clearly encourage you to look at these other markets who would be probably even more in need.
Yeah. I will note that something that Starlink does is adjust its prices based on country. But even then, I mean, they're discounting $40, $50 a month in countries that are making a fraction or have a fraction of the median income of the United States.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Please remember to state your name.
as I recall, I'm John Levine. Yeah, nice piece of work. I was struck by one of your earlier slides where you said it's like there's a whole lot of people in sort of over here in the denser cells, and I'm wondering, did you look at it? I think like if you got a cell with 5,000 people in it, you would think that would be an attractive place for some sort of fiber or cable or something. Could you tell enough about where the cells were, like why, given that there were all these people in all these cells that purported to be underserved, what was going on? Was that real, or was that like some sort of weird artifact? Because I've heard stories like they came up with maps of underserved places, so Starlink is the sole provider in like a parking lot at the Boston airport, which is apparently officially underserved by mobile service. So I guess the question is like, somebody, like 6,000 locations per cell, like where's the phone company?
Yeah, I guess also for some some background, each cell is around 250 square kilometers.
Okay.
It's not like these 6,000 locations where Boston parking lot or
yeah, but I mean it's still
but it was pretty interesting. It seemed like these locations were kind of clustered in two areas. One was around Utah, and another was towards the south, I think around like Arkansas and
Utah makes sense because there's a lot of nothing.
Yeah.
The south, that may just be poverty.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because I'm just thinking, in our semi-rural part of New York, we came up with what you suggested in your last slide is like we have a cable company and we have Verizon, which has some fiber, but then we had a county thing, and like, but there are some places where you could put the thing up on the hill and give them fixed wireless, and there was another place where there's a local cable company, and you could add stuff in, and so I think that. I don't know how to propose that you do this. Like Starlink is sort of like the number 3 when you can't get something local, and I despair for how you actually come up with an economically rational way to give people reasonable incentives to do the right thing here.
Yeah, I don't know.
Thanks for doing this work, and thanks for bringing it here. I had a question. I'm just curious. Are you going to do more with this, or what? What are you looking to do?
Yeah, I think I would love to do more. I think specifically. Trying to create a higher fidelity model of how we can estimate the size of a constellation required to serve a given demand footprint. Again, this is like a very, this doesn't take into account, areas of medium density, and, they're all clustered together. And so that's a direction we'd like to take it in.
Yeah, sort of what Jörg said. I would suggest you take a look at those affordability pieces, because in the, Jonathan Brewer in the comments just noted that his Starlink plan in New Zealand is about 45 US per month, and in the Cook Islands it's about 35 per month. But even in the United States, I know a good number of people who use the roaming plan, which is $50 a month. So there is and that can be even discounted further, because as Steve wrote in the comments, Starlink has a lot of variability in there. So I just think when you're positioning, or when you're talking about the affordability, I think it's kind of important to notice that you're using the kind of the standard rate, but there's a lot of variability in that, and so the economics are very different if you're looking at a $50 a month plan versus the $120 a month type of thing.
Yeah, that's great. That's a really great point. We chose to look at the $120 a month plan because based on the FCC's recent ruling. Reliable broadband is defined as 100 megabits per second down, 20 megabits per second up. And this is the only plan that Starlink offers that can provide that or guarantee that.
All right. I think you should just, I think because you're going to get other people who will come up and say, well, I don't pay that for my, so your affordability arguments are wrong and blah, blah, blah. So I think just that would be my careful statement around that. Thank you for doing this work. I hope you continue doing it. We need more research in this space. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much. So I will start from the issue of affordability, because that is something that is of interest to me too. And I'm aware that there is a rule of thumb around affordability. I was talking about 5% of, let's say, minimum wage in a particular country, right, per month. Right. So I'm just wondering if that is what it is in the United States. Right. That is on one hand, because I saw that the scope of your studies was just based in United States, right?
Yeah.
However, I would want to advance this conversation to other parts of the world where Starlink is being used. So I'm from Nigeria, by the way. Okay, so I'm thinking that peradventure it is high time we started looking at how we can actually bring in these cost indices of affordability so that it can actually make impact, right? That is on one hand. Then on the other hand, I will really want to speak to the issue of meaningful connectivity, right? Meaningful connectivity, as it is known, it's when you have a phone, right? You can make a call on your phone, then you can actually browse the internet, not just browsing, but you can, let's say, let me use a pragmatic example. You can do maybe money transfer, right? Or maybe you can just do some digital economy basic stuffs, right? So I'm just wondering if peradventure the meaningful connectivity you were defining is still based on that standard. Okay, so I just want you to clarify. However, by and large, I think this is a very good work, and I love it. And please, you need to extend it to other part of the world.
Sure.
All
Thank
right.
you. Yeah, I mean, again, meaningful connectivity, our definition that we adopted was, reliable internet at affordable prices. And our definition of reliable was based on the Federal Communications Commission's guideline of 100 megabits per second downlink and 20 megabits per second uplink. Yeah, again, there's no no clear answer to that question of what is reliable internet or what is reliable connectivity, given the range of applications and the range of types of internet users. And so this was just the best guideline that we could use. Yeah.
Right. So sorry, the reason why that question came up was based on the fact that there is this thing we call contentious ratio when it comes to the internet, right? You are supplying internet to a particular location, right? You need to look at the number of users, right, that you will be supplying based on your bandwidth. Then it gets to a particular level, as in the number of users. You will just have to agree with me that the quality of service and the quality of experience will start to depreciate. So at that level, that threshold, I think that is where the capacity of your network is. So that is the reason why we need to know, okay, meaningful connectivity so that it won't go below, that level. Yeah.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
Are there any more questions? Thank you for those questions to date. And if anybody wants to speak that isn't in the queue here, but in the room, and you haven't signed in to Meet Echo, feel free to ask a question. We have about 2 more minutes for Q&A for Wesley. And Wesley, are you here all week?
Yeah, I'll be here.
Wesley's here all week. Ping him. And if you have any other questions, but great point about the contentious ratio. I had also put a note in the chat about in some rural areas, people will share a subscription, which could throw things off, but I'm not sure by how much.
I'm just curious, does anyone in the room have Starlink? Okay.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Wesley. Great job. All right. And the next speaker will be Steve Song. And Jane is getting the slides. There we are. So, and Steve, I'm going to give you the slide control. So everyone, please meet Steve Song from the Internet Society. He is here to talk about the Open Fiber Data Standard. Steve, over to you. And I'll give you a note if you're at about the 22-minute mark.
Great, thank you. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Steve Song. I'm a Senior Director for Infrastructure Mapping at the Internet Society, and want to talk to you today about about fiber optic infrastructure, kind of the opposite end from Starlink, from the heavens to the ground, as it were. And I'm glad to be speaking at GAIA, because actually this is kind of where this concept of transparency in the telecom sector had its birth, and that was about 5 years ago. I sort of raised the idea of the need for more transparency in the sector, and happy to be reporting on that progress today. So when it comes to undersea cables, there's a lot of public information available, and thanks to companies like Telegeography, who I'm sure most people are familiar with, their submarine cable map. If you want to find out information about undersea cables, there's a lot of it that's readily available. And every new cable announcement, finds its way into the map and into the news. And indeed, there are good reasons for that, because, somewhere between 95 and 98% of global internet traffic transits via these cables, and the capacity continues to balloon in terms of what a single undersea cable can carry, and it's a foundational issue, I think, for the internet that doesn't receive a lot of attention. However, if you look at this map, you'll see that fiber appears to stop when it reaches the shores of any country, and this is, I think, an unfortunate representation of the kind of global fabric of the internet, because fiber doesn't stop. Fiber carries on across countries, and is just as important, the terrestrial aspect of this foundational infrastructure, as the undersea component. And as someone who's been mapping fiber optic networks across African countries for many years, it's become clear that some operators share data about their networks and some don't. And the rationale for who shares and who doesn't is not obvious. It just seems to be a matter of kind of the practice of the company. Some who see the sharing maps of fiber optic infrastructure as good marketing, and others seeing it as giving away a competitive advantage. But as we began to look around the world for who shares and who doesn't, it's surprising just how many network operators do share data on their fiber networks. And here, this is Unity in the US. They have an interactive map. You can zoom down to quite a detailed level. You can look for dark fiber or least capacity. And this is, if you're a small operator, a small ISP, this is key. Finding access to affordable backhaul is one of the most significant issues for sustainability if you are a community network, a small ISP, a municipal network, etc. Without access to this information, it becomes it's much more challenging. And it's not just in the US where network operators share this data. This is Dark Fiber Africa and South Africa, who have shared detailed maps of their network down to the curbside level for over almost 15 years. And this is RETN in the Ukraine, and this is a particularly interesting example for me, because one of the reasons that is often raised for not sharing data about fiber optic networks is for cybersecurity reasons, that it would expose network infrastructure to threats, whether terrorist or military threats. And one would imagine that a network like RETN would have taken down their map, with the commencement of hostilities in Ukraine. But this is a current picture of the map, and it's interactive, and you can it provides details of points of presence right down to the addresses and curbside of those POPs. So certainly in this case, it doesn't appear that publishing a map of fiber constitutes a risk to their infrastructure. And there are other institutions that are engaged in mapping fiber. This is the ITU. This is their global broadband infrastructure map. And they capture a fair amount of terrestrial fiber around the world. Unfortunately, all of this data that is shared with them is shared under NDA, so that you can zoom in a little bit on this map, but not to any level of detail. And most significantly, you can't download any of this data. You can't, grab the fiber data and compare it with other, or integrate it with other sources of socioeconomic data to produce new insights, or to link it with Ookla data or with mobile coverage data to figure out if fiber is making a difference. And so it becomes an issue. And if you're trying to source information for maps from public sources, there's a huge variability in accuracy, in that some are basically, it looks like someone drew the map in crayon and posted it as a JPEG on their website. Others are more detailed. Most of them are not dated, so you can't tell how up to date the resources are. Some have just the fiber routes, but not the points of presence. And of course, points of presence are absolutely key, in that is where you access the network. The formats are often not very satisfactory in terms of reusing the data. And there's no source of validation often for these maps, so that you can't sort of authenticate the data or point to a source that can say, yes, this is true. I vouch for this information. And so these challenges led to an initiative that was funded by the World Bank initially to develop a common framework, an open data standard for describing terrestrial fiber optic networks. And it was an initiative that was co-chaired by the ITU and the World Bank, but also included a number of African fiber operators, as well as the Mozilla Corporation, the Internet Society, and Digital Council Africa, which is an industry association for fiber to the home operators. And the result was this, the Open Fiber Data Standard. And it's just very straightforward. It's not rocket science at all. It just presents a common language for describing this foundational infrastructure to the internet. And it's something that we think has benefits for everybody. It's essentially a tide that raises all ships. And so for governments and regulators, I mean, having better and more cohesive information is going to lead to smarter investments. And this varies a lot around the world, but this is particularly true in emerging markets, where often the availability of information from operators on fiber data is pretty variable. The information that's supplied doesn't conform to a standard, and it's often supplied in a kind of infrequent way. And this is becoming a more and more critical issue as more and more fiber is put in the ground, and often runs into conflicts with other sectors in terms of being disrupted by other parts of the government that want to dig up the ground, or commercial entities that do the same. So having sets of data that describe this kind of underground and overhead infrastructure is key to actually reducing the number of interruptions to it. And also having a common language across countries allows you to do regional benchmarking and look at the growth of fiber from a regional perspective, as opposed to purely a national perspective. But maybe the biggest reason for having a common standard is for regulators. They often don't know, when operators are reporting to them, whether those operators are reporting on physically owning fiber infrastructure, whether they have a dark fiber on someone else's network, whether they have an IRU or lit capacity. Often that information is missing from what is reported. So this is a map from Brazil, from the regulator Anatel, and it's showing the fiber networks that exist between the two largest cities, Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro. And it looks like there are 9 fiber networks connecting those 2 cities. But because that data is not collected in a way that represents exactly what the physical nature of those networks are, we don't know whether that's just one big duct connecting the 2 cities, or 3 ducts, or how many operators actually own infrastructure versus leasing capacity on another operator. So having a common language for describing terrestrial infrastructure is key to solving this particular problem, which is key to understanding the true resiliency of national and regional infrastructure. And for operators as well, this is key. As I mentioned, for small operators in particular, they often operate at a kind of information disadvantage, and often the largest operators have fairly complete pictures of fiber infrastructure, but small operators lose out. So having this kind of common standard for sharing is a way of leveling the playing field. Often we've also found that operators are unwilling to share because they don't trust the other operators. And so we see the Open Fiber Data Standard as a way of kind of brokering a level of trust among operators to share more data. And of course, having an open standard means that you can share tools, right? So that if one regulator is creating a tool for monitoring or analyzing the impact of fiber investments, those tools will apply to anyone else using the Open Fiber Data Standard. So to kind of illustrate what that looks like, I want to briefly touch on another open data standard, and this is called the General Transit Feed Specification. And I would wager that most people haven't heard of the General Transit Feed Specification, but most of you probably have used it. So if you've caught a bus in New York City or in London or in any other major city, or looked for the time schedule for that bus, or for the metro or underground or subway, you've probably been leveraging this open data standard, which is a common language for transit providers to supply information about their service to map providers like Google Maps, Apple Maps, Bing Maps, et cetera, And we see a common kind of role for the Open Fiber Data Standard as being this kind of broker between the providers of fiber infrastructure and different uses for that data. We think regulators will have a different use for that data than, say, operator associations, than perhaps researchers. And we hope that all of those constituencies will have access to that data to serve their own needs. And it's pretty straightforward. It's just a collection of schemas that describe the routes of the fiber, where the access points on the fiber are, who the operators are, who built it, potentially, who funded the network, and it gives as I say, a common vocabulary to express that. And this is kind of what it looks like. That's I'm sure many in the room are familiar with the JSON standard. This is a JSON schema that describes a fiber network and is instantly renderable as a map, but also processable through for analytical tools and making available through a common API. It is JSON being the kind of lingua franca of the internet. It is a very, very standardized way of expressing the information about this. It's like most standards, it consists of a schema. It is meticulously documented, and it's supported by open source tools such as a validation tool to test whether the data conforms to the standard, and also conversion tools for converting it from an Excel spreadsheet to a GeoJSON standard and to other formats. And it covers the roots of the fiber networks, also the underlying characteristics of the infrastructure. So the capacity, the number of fiber strands, the the quality to which the fiber has been deployed, whether it conforms to the ITU outside plant standards for the deployment of underground fiber, and of course the administrative data that describes the entities that own and operate the infrastructure. At the moment, it focuses on backhaul, so essentially national and middle mile infrastructure. Doesn't cover undersea cables, which is kind of well represented by in other fora. Our intent is to also extend the standard to last mile, but it currently doesn't encompass that. And so what might that look like in practice? Well, we expect, rather than having a single gatekeeper for data, we expect each operator to have sovereignty, obviously, over their own data, and to make that data available either by submitting it to the regulator or making it available through an API, and maybe having different subsets of that data available to different constituencies. So the data collected by a regulator might be different from the data collected by an operator association, which might focus more on remediation of fiber faults than the regulator, who are perhaps more interested in fiber planning. And those consolidated data sets may find their way to the ITU, which may feed those global maps and hopefully produce a map that is more accessible and more fungible in terms of the use of the data behind those maps. So the Internet Society has taken on a kind of secretariat role in the development of this standard. Our intent is for the standard to find a home, perhaps at the IETF, which would be a fairly natural place for it to wind up. It is complicated a little bit by the fact that fiber infrastructure spans the internet and the telecom world in ways that leave it a little bit between, neither fish nor fowl, and that a lot of our constituency in talking to people about the fiber are regulators. But the IETF is not necessarily the natural venue for regulatory officials. So our work at the moment is really building that community. So wherever the standard winds up, whether it's at ITUT, within the ITU, or with the IETF, that there is that community that already exists around the standard that we're bringing to it. And so, and towards that end, we're working to support a governance mechanism which will see a public oversight of the standard and its evolution. We're investing in the development of software tools. So we're in the midst of developing a plugin for QGIS, which is arguably the most popular open source GIS management tool, so that you can edit and manipulate fiber network data, directly within a GIS tool. And we're working with other initiatives, both with the World Bank and with the ITU, that are working to promote broadband mapping especially in low-income countries. And so that, if you're interested, the URL is ofds.info. There are links there that point to the documentation around the standard, as well as mailing list you can subscribe to. And I think before I finish, I just want to touch on one of the biggest issues that comes up in talking about this standard, and that is the issue of cybersecurity. And that is often the very first reaction that we get is kind of like, well, you can't make this data available. It's it's putting our national security at risk. And so our response to that is, one is that that there is a legitimate risk to be to consider when publishing data about fiber networks. But there is also a significant cost to obscurity. And we see this argument also in undersea cables, in that, of the, nearly 200 undersea cable disruptions that happen every year, overwhelmingly, those are accidental, that are either kind of, seismic disruptions or ships dragging their anchor, but almost none of them are malicious. And so the lack of transparency when it comes to that undersea infrastructure is a factor that that plays into the cost of restoration of network infrastructure. And this is absolutely true for terrestrial infrastructure as well. That and this is MTN Ghana. This is the largest fiber operator in Ghana. And 939 cuts in 5 months has to be some kind of global record, I think, for fiber disruptions. But the point is that obscurity is costing them millions of dollars in sort of the restoration of services, and you have to take that into account. An issue I've also mentioned, already mentioned, is that the public evidence of operators that publish maps would suggest that this is not, this hasn't in practice proven to be a significant factor when in the consideration of what is important in terms of protecting the security of the network. And I think
sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
You have about 2 more minutes.
Oh, okay, perfect. And indeed, I think, as I mentioned in the beginning, I think if we want to understand the global fabric of the kind of foundational infrastructure of the internet, we need both undersea and terrestrial data in order to form that full picture. It's not enough just to have undersea cables. We need to see the full picture of fiber that weaves this foundational web of connectivity around the world. And of course, there are lots of ways of addressing cybersecurity concerns. There are lots of ways of obfuscating the data when making it publicly available so that it is still useful, but not useful in a way that could be manipulated by someone seeking to disrupt the network. And last but not least, we really emphasize with the standard that it is both an open standard and open data, and that even if you feel the need to have a conversation about whether this data should be open or public or not, the open standard, the common language of the Open Fiber Data Standard is kind of unassailable in terms of the need for having this common language for describing fiber infrastructure. That's it. I'm going to stop there, and very happy to take any questions.
I have a question for you, Steve. When it comes to the work with the ITU, have you found that some governments are just politically, they can't put that information out there?
Well, yeah, the word "can't" is a complicated word. Definitely won't is true, and some of them, such as are very unsuccessful conversations with the Ugandan regulator, that they said, that the cybersecurity kind of shut the door to the conversation, that there was just no way that this was going to be made available, and it wasn't open for debate. And so, I mean, we've tried to construct the conversation so that you can, unpack the standard without having to get into the question of public data. But yeah, I mean, it comes down to two things. One is cybersecurity, often raised by governments, and the second is competition issues raised by some operators who say, well, we'll be giving away our competitive advantage by giving this information away.
Okay, thank you. So Jonathan Black, you're in the queue.
Hi, Steve. Good to see you again, and good to hear this talk again. Everything you said is relevant to Canada, and I hope you keep preaching your message that we need access to this data, that there are savings, there are benefits to it. I am not in the realm of protecting whatever commercial interests there are, but there are situations where the carriers don't even know where their fiber is. They were maybe installed in times when there weren't computer systems to track it, there weren't asset tracking systems, or they've made an acquisition and the company they They acquired it. I've been in situations where I've taken pictures of fiber to send to the carrier to say, no, this is your fiber. So that's another kind of defense of the carriers. The other point is, in one of the charts you had the carriers on the bottom line, or the operators. I'd love to see another layer there where the data is actually crowdsourced. If we could teach people how to identify where such and such a carrier's fiber is, they might just volunteer that information up. And that could be another way of generating this data globally.
I think that's, I mean, it's a great point. And certainly I've trodden the crowdsourced route for many years. I think it has its limitations, but I think it is very good in sparking the conversation. And so often, if you can publish a crowdsourced map, that can actually provoke a conversation where the operator supplies says that's not accurate. We have much more fiber than that, and publishes their data. But I think it's a mix of those approaches is likely to be more successful than either one on their own. And I think you're absolutely right about fiber network operators. We have heard that story many times in many countries, with network operators admitting that often the accuracy of their network maps is a bit dodgy. Often they have excellent network facilities and tools that begin at kind of layer 2. But it is often a different department outside of engineering that is responsible for kind of maintaining the network map. And one of the most surprising things we found was that the majority of operators we have talked to, their principal tool for maintaining their network maps of physical infrastructure is Google Earth, which is a lovely tool, but just terrible at capturing any kind of metadata. And so, it is surprising that there is this kind of gap, I think, in terms of how this data is maintained and shared.
Steve, I put myself back in the queue because I wanted to ask you, I just saw something on LinkedIn from CCOM, a major submarine cable provider, announcing that they were going to become a terrestrial fiber provider using some of their submarine cable skills for network deployment. And I thought that was really interesting. And do you find that some of those companies, well, have you worked with CCOM? Will they give you, do you think they'd help you with data if you were looking at some other countries? Because as many of us know that's across Central Africa, it's so hard to get data. Yeah. I know you yourself have done a lot of mapping.
Yes, I mean, what CCOM are proposing of using undersea cable technology for terrestrial routes is very interesting. I've never heard of anyone doing that yet, and it has some interesting advantages. We haven't spoken to CCOM directly, mostly because they're mostly an undersea cable provider. They lease a lot of terrestrial capacity, but they don't own very much terrestrial capacity. But we are speaking to the very, very large continental fiber operators, and they see the advantage as well of sharing data under their own terms, but definitely they see the benefits.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else with any last minute questions for Steve? If not, we will move over to Eric's presentation. Thank you, Steve. Round of applause. Okay. I'm going to take, yes, okay. So give me a oops, hang on.
I'm curious about underlying
So, hang on, Eric. Before
I'll
I
go
do
ahead and
that,
do an audio check.
yeah,
You can
hang
hear
on
me
a
okay?
hang on a second, Eric. I'm trying to pull up your slides, but I can't. Let's see. Stop there. Bravo. La la, here we go. Okay, let me give you the controls. Voila. Okay, over to you.
Thank you. Awesome. Everyone can still hear me okay?
A little louder if you can get closer to
A little
the,
louder?
or, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. It's okay
You-
now?
You're competing with a very loud person in the room next door, or just different
I
opposite
have a
sound.
tendency to shout on Zoom anyway, so I'll have to lean into that. But just let me know if it gets softer. Hi everyone, my name is Eric Greenlee. I'm a PhD candidate at Georgia Tech, and here today I'm going to shift gears a little bit. So we've been talking about internet connectivity, but now I'm going to talk about a IoT sensor that we have co-designed. It's called McCook. It's a sensor we co-designed to support ecosystem health and tribal sovereignty with some partners in kind of the neck of the woods that you all are in now. And so I want to share a little bit about that. And so just some context for the area. So this is a map of North America, and you can see Montreal is on the right here. And this is the map of all the native peoples who have inhabited these lands at one point in time. It's not a complete map, but in Montreal, the Haudenosaunee and the Mohawk peoples were there kind of historically, and still exist there in many capacities. And just to the west of that in green is the Anishinaabe homeland. And so these are the partners that we're working with in the Great Lakes region of the US. And so, just give a little bit of context that it's so based in the land. And so one subset of the Anishinaabe people are the Ojibwe people. It's a set of tribes and language groups in US and Canada, modern day US and Canada, in kind of the area around Lake Superior. And so that's in the center here. I guess you can't see my mouse. And so to the Ojibwe people, Minomen, which is the word for wild rice, is very important for a few reasons. One, culturally. And so in this part of the world, there's a lot of lakes, and the wild rice grows on these lakes. And a few hundred years ago, the Ojibwe people had this prophecy to go to the place where it grows on water, and they were in kind of the eastern part of the continent and moved west until they settled in this land that had wild rice, that had Minomen, and that's where they kind of put down the roots ever since. It's also an important part of the diet. In pretty harsh winters, there's not a lot of food sources, but Minomen is something that's harvested kind of abundantly in the fall and then consumed in the winter. And then finally, ecologically, it's kind of this keystone species in the region. And so not only for the people, but the plants and animals, it's important for sustaining life, and it's kind of sensitive to a lot of these things. So it's kind of canary in the coal mine for a lot of environmental problems. And so it's been facing threats in recent years. The kind of global scale threats of climate change, but then also there's local threats, land use change and water change. So tailings ponds from mines will have sulfate that leaches in and poisons the rice. Just kind of development will cause more silt in the water, which kills off a lot of things. And then there's other non-native plants and wildlife that outcompete it. So it's face threats, and we have partnered up as part of the Strong Minomen Collective, which is a consortium of academics, including myself, and some tribal partners. So there's a bunch of tribal nations in the area. I'll go on that a little later. And other land stewards who are trying to contribute to the conservation of Minomen. And in doing so, it's about more than Minomen, even though, to our partners, that's, a very important thing. But it's also a way of supporting Ojibwe and indigenous sovereignty. And so a lot of these nations have treaties with U.S. government, with other governments that state that they have a right to hunt, fish, and gather on these lands. And it's impossible to hunt, fish, and gather if all the things you're hunting, fishing, and gathering are no longer there. And so that's kind of the foothold for using data, assert sovereignty to protect these waterways that are important to Ojibwe culture. And so some of our other kind of values here are centering relationships and being very relational. So you can see in the picture on the right, it's this big group where we had a workshop together to co-design the sensor that I'm going to talk about in a minute. And the final value I want to discuss is valuing different ways of knowing. So drawing upon both kind of Western scientific knowledge and traditional ecological knowledge to support each other to gain insights into the environment and, support a healthy lifestyle and sovereignty for these partners. And so one component of this collective is the design and deployment of macaque, which you can see in the picture here on the right. So that's me and my project partner, Blaine, deploying one of them this year. And so the goal of these low-cost water quality sensors is to understand what the monomen experience is. So to sit in the water and, feel the temperature that it feels, or if there's wake, if there's waves, to be able to record that, if there's sound, if there's a change in turbidity or conductivity, to record all those things and really provide, insight to our partners. And it's doing this through real-time communication. So every few hours, it'll kind of take all the data that it's collected and try to send that through the cellular network if connectivity is available. And our partners both use this for real-time action and long-term analysis. So some folks might be able to go out and see that something's not quite right. Oh, the water level's changing faster than it should. I can go talk to this other company that's, pulling in water when they're not supposed to. And then also for kind of long-term science. Our goal with designing these was for them to be easy to deploy and to use so that people without a lot of, say, technical background or experience could go drop them in the water and be able to also use the online dashboard for data in an accessible way. And then finally, have a low cost of experience, both low cost parts and then also to support remote applications so folks wouldn't spend a lot of time and therefore a lot of, their like most precious resource traveling to these places to get these insights. So we developed this, you can see on the bottom, over multiple seasons. We started off by shadowing fieldwork. So before we even started the kind of technical design of this, by spending 3 months in the field with partners to develop those relationships. And then we've had 2 years of pilot deployments, eight sensors deployed the first summer, and then this past summer, 20 sensors, and I achieved those a few weeks ago before it got too cold in the Texas. So here's another picture of the device and a list of all the things that it's sensing. And these are all driven by partner priorities, but you can see there's air and water temperature. Interestingly, if you measure the pressure at the anchor and the pressure of the air, you can take that difference to see a change in water level, because water asserts a set amount of pressure for every kind of centimeter that it's submerged in. Humidity, acceleration, and a few different water quality standards like conductivity, turbidity, dissolved oxygen, as well as sound, which our partners were interested in knowing kind of what plants and animals were interacting with it in the region. And then in terms of the infrastructure to get all these sensing data back, to provide actionable insights, it is connecting via through the Particle platform, which is kind of a hardware platform through the cellular network. And then there's also Bluetooth connectivity available locally, so to connect your phone directly to the device, bypassing the network. And this is something that we've seen can save a lot of headache if you're not sure whether a device is connecting in the field and you're waiting for these kind of long round trip times for data to come from the device to the network and then to load a web page on your phone. Instead, you can bypass that and just see, okay, I can see that the device is set up correctly. It's the temperature values that it's reporting are reasonable. And then, of course, it has an SD card backup in case it's not able to connect to the network, and solar charging, and it also reports its GPS location. And so here's the dashboard that we've co-developed for showing data in near real time. You can see so this is showing conductivity, which is kind of the amount, how electrically conductive the water is. And so that will rise if there's different salts in the water or sulfate. And this is at 2 sensors that we deployed with one partner. And so, just to demonstrate that there's data available live. It's still an open question of how we can make these data, once we collect them, actually actionable and integrated with our partners. Some of the use cases that folks have discussed that are still a little aspirational. So rather than replacing people with sensors, with IoT sensors, we see it as a way of triaging and providing human in the loop sensing. So if there's 20 sensors deployed in a region, partners can get insight and see, oh, maybe 1 or 2 of them are experiencing anomalous values. Maybe that's a good reason to go out and take a higher quality sample. Say, for example, for sulfate, which is something that you could see it would have a change in conductivity, but you can directly attribute that change in conductivity to sulfate. There's also enforcement that our partners can take. They're sovereign nations that have their own police and wardens, and so there's a lot of instances where they'll have regulations in place, but just not the personnel to enforce them. And so, for example, if motorboats are creating a lot of wake and that's damaging the vegetation, they can see trends or see kind of real-time data of that and go out and focus their efforts there. And then there's some kind of longer-term use cases, for example, setting policy and holding entities accountable. It's definitely, the system is more responsive, given that we're working with tribal governments who have kind of more values aligned with environmental protection. And so, over the course of a few months or a year, data could turn into, a new policy, or even like a lawsuit or something like that if an entity is not respecting what they're supposed to do. And then there's kind of the long-term science, microclimate science. You can deploy a bunch of these because they are low cost and have user experience kind of in mind, to be accessible for folks without much background in environmental sensing. That can tell you data, for example, about diseases that the wild rice experiences, and then just as a general exploration tool. And so, as I was saying before, we deployed 20 of these co-designed devices this summer. And so you can see the area on this map on the left, the kind of broader outline, different treaty boundaries, and that has important implications for what legal rights tribally enrolled members have. And then the smaller kind of orange boxes are reservations. You can see there's some sensors on reservations, some sensors off reservations, because there is a charge to co-manage these spaces. And so yeah, we partnered with 8 organizations, deployed these over about 6 months. And you can see the one on the right here is a little worse for the weather than the one in the previous slide. But it's, it's doing okay. We're analyzing those data now to figure out how these can transform into actionable and sustainable solutions for our partners. So, the thing I really want to focus on here, and that I think might be interesting to this community, are the challenges that we experienced in kind of realizing these visions and these use cases. And so one is with cellular connectivity. I'm guessing it'll come as a surprise to no one that the maps that cellular providers describe are not accurate, especially when you get to these rural areas. And so we're really looking for ways, not just to hold these companies accountable, but ways to be able to predict what the cellular connectivity actually will be in a site, because we have this kind of iterative process with our partners of deciding where to deploy these sensors based off of the ecological relevance, based off of the ease of physical access, then also the connectivity. And so having a tool either beforehand, to predict what the connectivity is going to be like more accurately, or even at the site to kind of show where you might have the highest chance of getting connectivity, that would be really useful, because maybe a third of these sensors weren't able to connect ever. And that's frustrating when you're trying to get data real time. It's also still not clear how to make these data kind of accessible and actionable to our partners. We have, this online dashboard, but folks didn't log into it that much. We used a co-design process, which I think a lot of people would advocate for as the way to make sure that your data and your product are aligned with your goals of your partner organization. But there's still just people wearing a lot of different hats, kind of over constrained. So we're trying to figure out ways to make it easier to act on these data. And then there's just some kind of hardware things. So my background is in electrical engineering, and these problems with how you assemble something and sustain it so that it's going to go out for 6 months in a pretty harsh environment. That was unexpected. And then also just managing requirements across a diverse set of users. So we had 8 different partners this year, and even within each partner, there's people with different priorities. How do you make one device or a set of devices easily managed that aligns with the organization? Not scalable to have a new device for each specific deployment. And just some kind of insights that we've learned through the process. Weaving different systems of knowledge together, and so this is specifically talking about traditional ecological knowledge, has been very important for kind of streamlining the technical design. So we use our partners' knowledge and kind of intergenerational knowledge even to figure out what kind of technical design aspects we need to focus on. For example, for making something waterproof for the often rainy summers. There's also, we notice, a very big distinction between data sharing and data sovereignty. And so we've written memorandums of understanding with each of these partners, expressing that they own the data, but then that still has introduced a lot of complications in how you make the data accessible, protected, and shared with exactly who they want to share it with and nothing more. And then, kind of as I was talking about before, co-designing with individuals versus communities is a challenge here, in that you're kind of having consensus among a bunch of different organizations. And then finally, just evaluating the utility of low-cost sensing. So there's this big promise within the IoT world of, we can sense these things really easily, low cost, but then to actually understand what the quality is and how to make those data actionable is ongoing. So with that, I just want to acknowledge all the other folks who have put a lot of work into this in the Strong Monomic Collective, and I welcome any questions or ideas folks have.
Jonathan, did you want to ask your question, or do you want me just to read it out? Eric, there was a note from Jonathan Brewer, who's done a lot of work around the planet to build not only mobile networks, but I don't even want to get into how much he's done, but he's very well known mostly in the Asia Pacific region, but in general, a great person to work with. You've got cross marks against all your participation options. Okay, well, let me work on that for a sec. But Eric, could you take a look at the chat? Jonathan's asking about,
Yes.
he's recommending the use of LoRa. And I was actually thinking about that too, because years ago when I was working on community networks at another organization, I saw there was a network in the high mountains of Georgia using LoRaWAN for looking at helping monitor the solar panels in the network, because in some areas they just couldn't go out every day. Have you thought about using a LoRaWAN, running a LoRaWAN cellular gateway on a high point above your water, then using the Things network for a data hosting platform?
Yeah, no, this is a great question. We've gotten lots of questions about LoRa, and we've explored it pretty deeply. I think the challenge with these, we're already in pretty remote sites, and so to get someone to not just maintain the sensor, but to also maintain the LoRaWAN gateway can be a challenge, especially if the sensor deployment sites are far enough apart that one gateway can't service multiple sensors. So yeah, I'm curious to hear and it sounds like Jonathan might not be able to talk, but maybe just type out in the chat or as we go through other questions, what Jonathan's experience is maintaining these LoRa gateways. Do you need a lot of, like, do you employ people to maintain them? How often do they need to be checked up on? And then also, what kind of realistic range are you getting? When I've played around with LoRa, I've never been able to get the 10-kilometer range, and I'm lucky if I even get the 1-kilometer range. But maybe there's kind of more robust hardware out there that can allow us to service multiple sensors with one gateway.
I don't know why, Jonathan, I'm looking at you online here and I can't see why you wouldn't be able to speak, but he can't enable mic or video. So if you could, Jonathan, do you mind popping your email in the chat so that Eric could connect with you offline? Because there could be a really good connection here between the two of you for, there you go. Meet Jonathan. Does anyone have any questions in the room? Anyone else? Eric, did some First Nations, tribal communities, indigenous communities are notably very closed, and also usually you have to work with the chief or the head person in the community, whether that's it depends on who that may be based on that culture. Did you have to get approval from the local council, or I don't know, in order for you to do this? Because even though it's not setting up a tower in a sacred space, or but to Jonathan's point, if you were going to put something up on a high point, those are usually sacred spaces. Did you have to get approval? And what was that buy-in like? Because it can be notoriously difficult to work in certain indigenous communities. And sorry, I jumped in.
No, thank you. That's a great question. And I mean, the answer is it really just depended on the partner. Like each nation or each even, department within each indigenous nation would have its own both processes and culture. So some were kind of like, no, this is such a pressing problem. Happy to just go deploy these things, and we'll kind of figure it out as we go. Others of them, yeah, we have memorandums of understanding that we formally write up and present to the governing council, the legislative body. They'll approve it. But then ultimately, I mean, it gets delegated down to the natural resource departments in each of these tribes. And then there's usually kind of one champion or point person there who will be able to make decisions. We've been able to act kind of quicker than I would have expected. And overall, the attitudes towards technology have been more positive than I expected. Folks are excited about getting sensors out. Maybe that's a response bias that I'm only hearing from the people who want to engage, but at least with the few nations we've worked with, people are generally positive, and as long as you kind of follow some baseline standards, are happy to deploy things and haven't had any reservations about where we deploy them, as long as that as a cooperative process.
Excellent. Any other questions in the room? I'm not seeing any, or not online. Thank you very much, Eric. This was excellent, and continue the great work. Quick round of applause for Eric. And thank you everyone for participating here in the room and online. Stay tuned. I know you've heard us say before that we're going to be revising the RFC, but we really mean it this time. We have a third co-chair named Adisorn, who is from Thailand, and he will be helping lead us at the next IETF meeting, 125 in China. I'm not sure Curtis and I are going to be able to go. I certainly won't be able to, given my day job, but I just wanted to give a shout out to Adisorn for the next meeting in advance. Thank you all for being here. Have a great evening, and have a good rest of your IETF. Okay. And thank you to Steve, Wesley, and to Eric. We really appreciate your participation and your presentations. Thanks all. Have a good evening. Okay. How are you? We're done early. wait, I won't say much until we're out.